Okay, I'm just doing a quick video today so we can compare notes about what you came up with for the prompt yesterday and what I came up with. I did get a chance to kind of skim through your essays, and it looks like all three of you guys were on the right track. I didn't see any crazy issues where you were thinking the soliloquy was about, women's rights or something. You guys all seem to be on the right page. Real quickly, agenda items for today. I do want you to reflect on how things went. What do you think that you did well? What are some things that you felt really confident about to start, positives? And also go forward to what did you struggle with. I mean, know what I need to teach you guys, but if there's any advice or things that you want to share with me that I can specifically focus on, that always helps me structure my lessons a little bit better. Put those in your mini books for me. I want to talk about the Foster paper. You have a little handout that I've given you, and I also want to talk about the Foster reflection homework that you're going to be doing tonight or over the weekend. Over the weekend you're going to read chapters 10 through 14, a little bit more of a chunky read because it's a 2-day weekend, and then you're going to write a 2 to 3 page reflection, kind of like what you did for the midterm response. So you're telling me what you're thinking as you're reading, what things are standing out to you. It's like a blog, it's just a little bit longer, and I really want you to think about the Foster paper. So what is the Foster paper? This is coming up. It's not coming up real soon, but it is coming up, and I like to tell you ahead of time so you can start looking for things and thinking about things now instead of trying to figure things out a day before the paper needs to be done for a first draft. You guys are going to have to pick a piece of quality AP literature. So you got to be thoughtful about what you're picking. Like for instance, Harry Potter keeps popping up. That is not AP literature. It's a great book, don't get me wrong. I love Harry Potter, but it's not what we call AP appropriate. It's not what the College Board is going to want to see on your essays. So you have to pick something that's going to be AP appropriate. So anything from your past English classes is good. Maybe Frankenstein really stands out to you. Maybe Lord of the Flies, or Hamlet, or Of Mice and Men. That one would work. Think back to what you've studied in the past. If you've read other literature beyond that, use that literature as long as it's AP quality. And if you're confused about AP quality, you can ask me. Also, we're going to read some short stories coming up this week and the following week. Those short stories are also great things that you could utilize, but think about short stories too, like The Most Dangerous Game you read. You read The Lottery. You might have read The Lottery, which was about the stoning. I'm trying to think because I've taught English 1. What were some of the short stories? The Necklace is another short story. So you can do poems as well, but poetry might be a little bit difficult because poetry is very short. But you're going to pick something that's AP appropriate, and you're going to apply at least 4 of Foster's theories. I'm moving up to 4 because a lot of times kids will do 3, and then you get the basic 3 body paragraphs, the intro, the conclusion. You get a 5-paragraph essay, and it looks really awful. So you need to pick 4 theories from Foster and apply it to this literary piece. So for instance, Book Thief is always popular, so maybe you argue that Liesl is on a quest. Maybe you argue that communion, eating dinner brings communion and brings people together. Maybe you then argue that Rudy is a Christ figure, and then maybe you talk about how geography matters. Those are some examples. I don't know if those apply right now, but I'm just throwing them off the top of my head. So that's what you're going to be doing soon. And if you want to start talking about some of those literary connections as you do your reflection paper, you may. If you have any questions about this, let me know, but the reflection paper will be due on Monday, and you're going to turn it in to me. So start thinking about Foster and how he applies to other things, just like you did in your blog. But this time you're pushing it to deeper literary choices and selections. So you guys did your first prompt, and what I want you guys to do is to discuss what you thought about the prompt and what you thought specifically about the poem. I'd like you to do a voice recording for this, so if you guys could sit together, talk about what did you notice, understand, thought, or basically got out of the poem and what you put in your essays. That's where I want your conversation to go. Think structurally, think about the prompt, also think about what his overall message was, and you can talk it out, you can read chunks of your essay aloud, all of that is fine, but I want you guys to try that for a few minutes, so go. Okay, so what do I think is going on in the prompt? Now, what I think is going on in the prompt, as well as in the soliloquy, is not necessarily the right answer in terms of analysis, or more it's, for instance, your interpretations might be a little bit different, or what you use as evidence might be different, or what you actually articulated might be a little bit different. So it's not that there's necessarily a completely right answer, but there's, I mean, you got to be in the right ballpark here. So let me get my poem up. Basically, in the prompt, you have to do two things. Remember, AP is all about multitasking intellectually. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to argue about the lit devices, or the structural items that they've given you. They want you to talk about diction, they want you to talk about imagery, and they want you to talk about syntax, and what are you seeing? But at the same time, they also want to argue why those three techniques are being used in relationship to Shakespeare conveying the king's state of mind. Now, I think all three of you guys, from what I saw, understood that the king's state of mind is very disturbed and fitful because he can't sleep. And a lot of you guys argued the reason why he can't sleep is because he's a king. He's got a lot of things and obligations going on. And you end up seeing him talk about how he can't sleep, but yet his subjects can. So that's his state of mind, which is good. And if you're articulating that and you figured that out, that's good. Alright? The way it could go bad is if you say, well, he's talking about how he's really sleepy because he went camping, and I mean, there's wrong answers, definitely. There's serious misinterpretations you could have come up with, but I think you guys were okay. But the more difficult part is how can you argue his state of mind in connection to the diction choices, in connection to the imagery and syntax. So here's my ideas. The first thing I focused on in my essay, and I'll give it to you, it should be in that folder, you're welcome to read through it, is I argue that his syntax is very important. You see the start of the soliloquy has exclamation points, exclamatory sentences. Alright? The exclamatory sentences help show that he is in a very pleading, very desperate state of mind. The use of the exclamation points really shows how upset he is with sleep, or with lack thereof, his insomnia. And also you have very short syntax here, oh sleep, oh gentle sleep. You also have apostrophe going on where he's calling out to something that is not alive. Sleep is not a living creature. It's personified, definitely, but it's also an apostrophe going on because he's calling out to sleep and he's actually delivering his speech to sleep. Now, you can't see my face because the sun is all a glare, so now I look pretty ghostly. The other thing that's going on here is you have the use of the exclamation points in terms of syntax, but then you have a lot of questions. They're very lengthy questions, very detailed questions, but if you notice, I think there's 4, if not 5 questions going on in this. So that would have been something I would have talked about, is the use of questions, because that's a very interesting syntax device used by Shakespeare. And so what ends up happening is it helps also once again show how desperate he is and how much he's pleading with this insomnia to stop. Looking at some of these questions, I ended up describing how the questions themselves have great syntax, but at the same time they are also utilizing imagery. So what you have going on here is you have some imagery that's juxtaposed. It's a contrast. You have imagery where you see people who can sleep in circumstances where they shouldn't be able to. I use the example where he's talking about people who liest thou in smoky cribs, upon uneasy pallets stretching thee, and hushed with buzzing night flies to thy slumber. And then he proceeds to talk about his chamber, which is very nice and cushy and wonderful. So you got a juxtaposition or a contrast. You have images of where sleep would be hard because you're on a crappy bed, you're in a hut surrounded by bugs. And then you have the image where sleep should be pretty easy because you're cloaked in luxury. And you see that contrast of imagery going to help him illustrate the fact that he can't sleep. He really can't. I ended up describing in detail the imagery with the boat, which I thought was the strongest imagery, especially because it takes up the second half of the soliloquy. And I argued that he uses a very violent description of imagery to help reinforce how upset his state of mind is and how anxious and desperate he is. So you see my claim is kind of the same thing. He's desperate, he's anxious, he cannot sleep, he's pleading for sleep. And if you have read this carefully, basically he starts to describe a ship, and he starts to describe a very turbulent storm that's rocking the ship, and yet the wet sea boy in an hour so rude is able to sleep, but he can't. And I think you guys will notice when we get into Shakespeare, he loves his ocean ship imagery and metaphors. He loves to illustrate the problems at hand by using those type of images. So just keep that in mind. Shakespeare is a big proponent of using imagery, metaphor, especially ship metaphors, to help articulate his argument or what's going on. Now, I ended with my discussion of diction. I kind of went in an opposite order of what was going on here, but I ended up discussing basically he's upset because he can't sleep, but he's not so upset that he's trying to offend sleep. I think you have images where it shows, yes, he's very distressed, and yes, he's very unhappy. You got some very sad, disturbed imagery, but you also have some diction choices that are more related to appeasing sleep and not making sleep seem like the total bad guy. So here's what I mean. Shakespeare describes sleep as something that's a nurse, a soft nurse, something that is lulled, sweetest melody, slumber. You end up having these kind of very pleasant diction choices, very nurturing and caring diction choices, which I think help offset the speech so it's not just a rant on sleep. And yes, the speaker is upset with sleep for not helping him get through sleep, but the speaker at the same time still has an appreciation for sleep. So that's how I kind of worked out through this. And then obviously what I did for my conclusion, and we'll talk more about conclusions later, is I concluded it with a very short discussion about this last line, which is uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. So what is the purpose of this whole speech is something that you want to talk about in the conclusion, and that's very difficult to do because you guys have been taught to kind of summarize what you wrote about for the whole essay. So I ended up talking about how this last line really helps the audience from Shakespeare's play realize that royalty and being royal is not always as wonderful as it may seem. So that's what I came out with it. I'm going to read your essays in more detail. You guys have just discussed it. Can you shut the curtain? You've just discussed it, and then what I need you guys to do is go back through your essay, reread it, and at the end I'd like you to write a little reflection about how you think you did, what's something that you missed out or could have discussed, as well as what you might need to do in the future. And you are done for today.